Have you ever thought about what a future that never arrived actually sounds like? It's not the sound of flying cars. It's not robots walking down the street. And it's definitely not the neon cyberpunk world movies promised us back in the 1980 seconds. If you stand in the middle of Shibuya Crossing in Tokyo today and close your eyes for a second, you hear something completely different. You hear silence. Not total silence. The trains are still moving. The speakers are still talking. Rain hits the pavement. Traffic lights beep. But underneath all of that, there's another sound hiding there. A strange emptiness. A silence that feels wrong. For years, the world looked at Japan like it was the future of humanity. Anime, bullet trains, robots, giant neon signs, crazy technology. We convinced ourselves that Japan was living in the year 3000 while the rest of us were stuck in the present. But that image is mostly an illusion, because behind the glowing lights and clean streets, there's another reality nobody talks about. Japan doesn't feel like a country from the future anymore. It feels like a giant high-tech retirement home. Everything still works perfectly. The trains arrive exactly on time. Store workers bow politely. Streets are spotless. Vending machines glow all night long. But if you look a little closer, you start noticing the cracks. Many stores are no longer staffed by young Japanese workers. Instead, you see exhausted elderly people or immigrants from Vietnam, Nepal, and the Philippines because there simply aren't enough young people left. Some famous neighborhoods are slowly turning darker at night because businesses can't afford electricity anymore, or because customers disappeared years ago. Japan feels frozen in time, like the country got stuck somewhere in the 1990 seconds and never fully moved on. Fax machines still exist. Paper documents are everywhere. Old corporate traditions still control daily life. It's an analog society pretending to be digital. And the strangest part is this: nobody is screaming, nobody is rioting, nobody is breaking windows, nobody is demanding revolution. People just keep going to work, quietly, politely, tired. Japan is not collapsing like an explosion. It's fading away slowly. And maybe the scariest part of all is this: the rest of the developed world may be heading in the exact same direction. But every illusion eventually breaks. And Japan started breaking a long time ago. To understand what happened, you have to go back to the late 1980s. At that time, Japan looked unstoppable. Its economy was exploding. Japanese companies were buying skyscrapers in New York, Hollywood studios, and famous artworks like they were cheap souvenirs. People honestly believed Japan would dominate the entire 21st century. The country looked rich beyond imagination. Land prices became insane. At one point, the land underneath the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was supposedly worth more than all the real estate in California combined. Everybody thought the miracle would last forever. Then the bubble exploded. The stock market crashed. Real estate prices collapsed. Banks started drowning in bad debt, and Japan entered an economic nightmare it never truly escaped. Economists like to call it the lost decade. But that's misleading. It wasn't one lost decade. It was 30 years. 30 years of weak growth. 30 years of falling confidence. 30 years of people quietly realizing the future they were promised was never coming back. Today, huge parts of Japan's economy survive almost entirely on artificial support. There's even a term for many of these companies: zombie companies. Businesses that are technically alive but basically dead. They don't innovate. They barely make profit. Some can't even survive without constant loans and government help. But instead of letting them fail, Japan kept them alive because the government feared unemployment and social chaos. So the system just kept dragging itself forward, like a dying machine that nobody wants to shut off. Meanwhile, the country's debt became massive. Japan now has one of the highest government debt levels on Earth, more than 260% of its GDP. The central bank prints huge amounts of money just to keep the entire structure standing. And somehow, life still looks normal. That's what makes Japan so unsettling. The disaster never becomes loud. There are no burning streets, no giant protests, no dramatic collapse, just exhaustion. You see it everywhere. In overcrowded trains filled with people sleeping on their feet. In young workers who no longer believe hard work will improve their lives. In empty rural towns slowly disappearing year after year. In old people working jobs deep into their 70s because retirement no longer feels safe. Japan became a country living almost entirely on momentum. The giant companies still exist. The infrastructure still works. The image of stability is still there. But underneath it all, something broke years ago. The country that once terrified the world with its economic power now feels tired. And many Japanese people already know it. They just rarely say it out loud. Because in Japan, keeping the appearance of stability matters almost as much as stability itself. So people keep working, keep smiling, keep following the routine, even while the system slowly runs out of energy. And the uncomfortable truth is this: Japan may not be a strange exception. It may simply be the first developed country showing what slow collapse actually looks like in the modern world. Imagine a giant luxury cruise ship in the middle of the ocean. The lights are still on. The restaurants are open. Music is playing softly in the background. Workers are smiling politely. Passengers are still drinking coffee and taking pictures. From the outside, everything looks normal. But there's one problem. The ship already hit the iceberg years ago. Nobody just wants to admit it. That's modern Japan. A country that still looks clean, rich, and organized on the surface, but underneath it is slowly sinking. And the scary part is how quiet it all feels. Because when most people imagine collapse, they imagine chaos, fires, riots, panic, empty stores, violence in the streets. Japan shows something much more disturbing. A society can slowly die without making much noise at all. It can fade away while everything still appears stable. That's the real diagnosis. Japan is not collapsing because of war. It's not being destroyed by some outside enemy. It's not a country exploding overnight. It's a country running out of emotional energy. You can see it everywhere. You see it in office workers staying at work until midnight, even when they have nothing important left to do. You see it in young people who stopped believing in relationships, marriage, or having kids. You see it in empty towns where schools shut down because there are no children left. You see it in millions of people living completely alone inside tiny apartments, talking more to screens than to actual humans. Japan feels like a machine that was built to run forever. For decades, it worked perfectly. The country became famous for discipline, order, efficiency, and sacrifice. That system created one of the greatest economic booms in modern history. But eventually the machine started crushing the people inside it. Because when a society demands perfection non-stop, people eventually break. In Japan, from a very young age, people are taught something simple. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't stand out too much. Don't fail. Don't create problems for the group. Study harder, work harder, endure more. For a while that created stability, but over time it also created exhaustion. That's why Japan now has millions of hikikomori, people who completely shut themselves away from society for years at a time. That's why death from overwork became an actual recognized problem. That's why so many young people feel emotionally disconnected from the future itself. The problem is no longer just economic. It's psychological, it's social, it's emotional. Japan feels tired on a national level. like an entire country that hasn't truly rested in decades. And then there's the demographic disaster. Japan is aging faster than almost any country on Earth. Every year there are fewer young people and more elderly people. Schools close, rural towns disappear, hospitals overflow, entire neighborhoods start feeling quieter and older. It's like watching a giant tree slowly stop growing new branches. The trunk is still standing, the roots are still there, but life inside it is fading. And yet everything continues functioning. That's what makes Japan so unsettling to watch. The trains still arrive on time, the streets stay clean, the stores stay open. The machine keeps moving even while the society inside it slowly loses its future. Japan feels like an actor smiling perfectly on stage while the theater behind him quietly burns down. And technology didn't save the country either. In many ways, it made things worse. Technology made isolation easier. You can order food without speaking to anyone, work remotely, escape into games, anime, social media, and virtual worlds. You can survive without real human connection. And little by little, millions of people started doing exactly that. The result is a society where loneliness became normal. Not dramatic loneliness, quiet loneliness. The kind that hides behind routines, polite smiles, and glowing phone screens. That's why Japan matters so much to the rest of the world. Because it doesn't feel like some alien civilization. It feels familiar. Too familiar. Many developed countries are already showing the same symptoms. Falling birth rates, extreme loneliness, work burnout, social isolation, people replacing real relationships with digital comfort. Japan simply got there first. That's why the country feels less like a strange exception and more like a warning. A warning about what happens when comfort replaces meaning, when stability becomes more important than human connection, and when an entire society slowly stops believing tomorrow will be better than today. That's the real iceberg Japan hit, and the water is still rising. There's a moment when a machine technically still works, but everyone can already tell something inside is broken. The lights are still on, the buttons still respond, the screen still flashes numbers, but the system itself is failing. That's modern Japan. From the outside, the country still looks incredibly successful. The trains are perfect, the streets are clean, stores are organized, everything appears calm and efficient. But underneath that polished surface, the engine is struggling badly. And the biggest problem starts with the economy. Back in the 1980s, Japan looked unstoppable. It wasn't just a strong country, it looked like the future ruler of the global economy. Japanese companies were dominating electronics, cars, entertainment, and technology. Sony, Panasonic, Toshiba, Toyota, Nintendo. These brands were everywhere. America was genuinely nervous about Japan's rise. People thought Tokyo would become the financial center of the world. Then the bubble burst. Real estate prices collapsed, stock markets crashed, banks panicked, and instead of allowing the economy to reset naturally, Japan made a decision that changed the country forever. It refused to let the system fail. At first, that sounds smart. Governments wanted stability. They wanted to protect jobs and avoid social chaos. But over time, that created something dangerous. An economy filled with zombie companies. These are businesses that should have died years ago. Companies that barely make money, barely innovate, and survive mostly through loans, government support, and cheap money from the central bank. In a normal competitive economy, weak companies disappear and new companies replace them. But in Japan, failure became something the system feared too much. So instead of cleaning out the broken parts, the country just kept everything alive artificially. Imagine a hospital where nobody is allowed to die. Soon, every room fills with patients connected to machines forever. That's what happened to large parts of the Japanese economy. The government and the Bank of Japan started printing huge amounts of money to keep everything functioning. Interest rates stayed extremely low for years and years, because raising them would crush companies and destroy the financial system. Now, Japan has one of the biggest debt burdens in human history, more than 260% debt compared to its GDP. That number is almost difficult to even understand. The country survives because the central bank constantly supports the system like a doctor keeping a patient alive with endless injections. And yet, people outside Japan often don't notice how serious things have become, because daily life still looks normal. That's the strange thing about slow collapse. The grocery stores are still full, the trains still move, the lights still turn on, but the long-term energy of the country keeps fading. For decades, wages barely grew. Young people work harder than ever, but many feel poorer and less secure than previous generations. Prices continue rising while salaries remain weak. Imported goods became more expensive. Energy costs climbed. Food prices increased. And then came another major problem: the weakening yen. Japan's currency used to represent stability and strength. Now the weak yen makes the country feel cheap to foreign tourists, while everyday life becomes more expensive for ordinary Japanese workers. Millions of tourists now arrive in Tokyo feeling rich. They shop for luxury brands, eat expensive sushi, stay in fancy hotels, and post beautiful pictures online. Meanwhile, many Japanese people quietly struggle with basic living costs. There are even fruits in Japan that many families now treat like luxury products. Think about how strange that is. One of the richest countries in the world, yet many people feel financially trapped, and the labor system only makes things worse. Japan built its entire post-war society around one core idea: if you work hard and stay loyal to your company, you will be rewarded with stability. For older generations, that was often true, but younger generations inherited a completely different reality. Today, millions of young Japanese workers survive on temporary contracts, unstable jobs, and low wages. Many work exhausting hours without feeling like they're building a future. That destroys motivation, because people can endure suffering if they believe it leads somewhere. But once people stop believing things will improve, the system starts rotting from the inside. And that's exactly what happened. You can see it in corporate culture. Japanese offices are famous for endless overtime, pointless meetings, rigid hierarchies, and obsession with appearances. Workers often stay late not because they're productive, but because leaving early looks disrespectful. The performance matters less than the ritual itself. Everything becomes theater. Workers pretending to work. Companies pretending to grow. The economy pretending to recover. And underneath all of it sits a massive demographic disaster. Japan is aging faster than almost any country on Earth. Every year there are fewer workers supporting more retirees. That creates unbelievable pressure on healthcare, pensions, and taxes. The country is slowly turning into an upside-down pyramid. A shrinking younger population carrying a massive elderly population on its back. Hospitals are overwhelmed. Retirement systems are under pressure. Rural towns are disappearing. And the government keeps spending more money trying to hold everything together. Money it doesn't truly have. So the debt grows larger, and larger, and larger. Japan became trapped. If interest rates rise too much, debt payments could become unbearable. But if rates stay low forever, the currency weakens and inflation hurts ordinary people even more. There's no easy exit anymore. The system survives because everyone keeps pretending the machine still works, normally. And then there's technology. The world still imagines Japan as some futuristic cyberpunk paradise, filled with advanced digital systems. But the reality is often weirdly outdated. Fax machines still exist everywhere. paper documents dominate offices. Old bureaucracy slows everything down. Personal stamps called hanko are still required for many official processes. Some government systems looked ancient, even deep into the 2020s. While Silicon Valley transformed the world through software, platforms, smartphones, and internet ecosystems, many Japanese giants stayed focused on hardware and old business models. Japan missed huge parts of the digital revolution. The country that once terrified the world with innovation now often feels slow and stuck. Even many Japanese websites look outdated and difficult to use. It's like the country became trapped between two eras, not fully old, not fully modern. And maybe that's the real system failure underneath everything. Japan became too afraid of disruption, too afraid of failure, too afraid of instability, too afraid to break old structures. So instead of adapting aggressively, the country tried to preserve everything exactly as it was. But no society can freeze itself forever. Eventually, reality catches up. And now Japan feels less like a rising superpower and more like a giant machine running on habit, debt, and exhaustion. Still functioning, still moving, but slowly losing the energy that once made it unstoppable. The real collapse of Japan doesn't start in government buildings or stock markets. It starts inside apartments, inside train stations, inside convenience stores, inside tiny office cubicles, inside bedrooms where people haven't spoken to another human being in weeks, because a country truly begins to break apart when everyday life stops feeling human. And that's exactly what's happening in Japan. Walk through Tokyo early in the morning. You'll see thousands of people moving silently through train stations like machines following a program. Black suits, blank faces, everyone staring at phones or the floor. Nobody talks. The trains are so crowded that workers are pushed inside like objects. Some people sleep standing up because they're too exhausted to stay awake. And this is considered normal. That's the scary part. Japan built one of the most efficient societies on Earth, but many people inside that system are emotionally drained. The average office worker lives inside a brutal cycle. Wake up early, commute for over an hour, work all day, stay late at the office, go home exhausted, sleep a few hours, repeat forever. For decades, this lifestyle was presented as honorable. Hard work was supposed to bring stability, respect, and success. But now the system feels more like a trap. There's even an official word for people literally working themselves to death: karoshi. Death by overwork. Not a metaphor, not a joke. Real people collapsing from stress, exhaustion, strokes, heart attacks, or suicide after years of non-stop pressure. And what makes it even darker is how normalized it became. Many workers stay at the office long after their work is finished because leaving early looks selfish. In some companies, people wait for the boss to leave first, even if there's nothing left to do. So workers sit there for hours pretending to work. The appearance of loyalty matters more than reality. That pressure slowly destroys people from the inside. Many Japanese workers barely take vacations. Some feel guilty for using sick days. Others apologize to co-workers for getting ill. Imagine living in a culture where resting makes you feel ashamed. That kind of pressure changes people psychologically. Eventually, many stop dreaming completely, and some disappear from society entirely. That's where hikikomori come in. Millions of people in Japan have completely isolated themselves from the outside world. Some stay locked inside their rooms for years, or even decades. They don't work, they don't date, they don't go outside. Some barely speak to anyone at all. Their lives happen entirely through screens. Anime, games, YouTube, social media. The outside world feels too stressful, too competitive, too exhausting. So they shut the door and slowly disconnect from reality. Many parents continue supporting their adult children deep into adulthood, because they feel ashamed or helpless. Food gets left outside bedroom doors. Entire families silently pretend everything is fine. And this problem keeps growing, because modern Japanese life creates enormous psychological pressure from childhood. Kids are expected to perform perfectly in school. Entrance exams decide futures. Social failure feels devastating. Standing out too much can make someone a target for bullying or rejection. The system teaches people to suppress emotions and avoid causing problems for others. Over time, that creates loneliness on a massive scale. And nowhere is that loneliness more visible than in Japan's apartments. Millions of people live completely alone. They eat alone, sleep alone, work alone, age alone. Some eventually die alone too. Japan even has a word for this: kodakushi, lonely death. People dying inside apartments and not being discovered for days, weeks, or even months. Neighbors notice newspapers piling up outside. A strange smell starts leaking into the hallway. Eventually, police break the door open. Inside, they find someone who disappeared from the world long before their body stopped breathing. Japan now has cleaning companies that specialize in handling these deaths. Think about how insane that is. Entire businesses built around cleaning apartments where lonely people died unnoticed. And these deaths aren't rare. They happen constantly, because modern life in Japan became incredibly isolated. Technology made survival easier, but human connection weaker. You can order food without talking to anyone, work remotely, watch entertainment endlessly, shop online, escape into virtual worlds. You can exist without truly participating in society. And millions slowly started doing exactly that. Even relationships themselves are collapsing. Japan has some of the lowest birth rates in the world because huge numbers of young people simply stopped pursuing romance altogether. Not because they hate love, because they're exhausted. Many young men feel financially hopeless. Dating feels expensive and emotionally draining. Many women feel trapped between impossible career pressure and traditional expectations around marriage and family. So people withdraw. Some replace real relationships with digital ones, virtual girlfriends, anime characters, dating simulators, AI companions. Others pay for fake intimacy. In Japan, you can literally rent a girlfriend for a few hours just to experience companionship. Some people rent fake families or actors to pretend they're friends. That's how lonely modern life became. Human emotions turned into services. And while all this happens, the country keeps aging rapidly. Playgrounds sit empty. Schools close down. Entire towns become filled mostly with elderly residents. In many rural areas, the average age keeps climbing higher every year. Japan increasingly feels like a country built for old people, waiting quietly for time to pass. Hospitals overflow. Care homes struggle to find workers. Young taxpayers carry more and more pressure. And underneath everything sits a massive emotional exhaustion spreading through daily life. That's what outsiders often miss about Japan. The country still looks beautiful. The streets are clean. The food is incredible. The trains are perfect. But beneath that polished surface, many people feel disconnected, overworked, isolated, and emotionally numb. Japan didn't collapse dramatically. It slowly turned everyday life into survival mode. And maybe that's what makes it so terrifying, because it proves a modern society can remain safe, advanced, organized, and wealthy, while millions of people inside it quietly stop feeling alive. So who actually caused this? Who turned one of the richest and most advanced countries on Earth into a society filled with exhaustion, loneliness, and quiet collapse? Was it the government, the corporations, technology, the culture itself? The uncomfortable answer is this: everyone played a role. Because Japan's crisis didn't come from one bad decision. It came from an entire system that slowly stopped serving human beings and started serving itself. First, there are the corporations. For decades, Japanese companies sold people a very simple deal. Give your entire life to work, and in return, you'll get stability and security. Millions accepted that deal. Workers stayed loyal to companies for decades. They sacrificed free time, hobbies, family life, sleep, and mental health because they believed the system would protect them. And for older generations, sometimes it actually did. But eventually the system became extreme. Japanese corporate culture turned into a machine that rewarded obedience more than creativity. Workers were expected to stay late, avoid conflict, and sacrifice themselves for the company. The ideal employee wasn't the happiest person. It was the person willing to suffer the most. And over time, that mentality poisoned everyday life. Parents barely saw their children. Workers became emotionally numb. People started associating adulthood with endless exhaustion. Even today, many employees feel trapped inside workplaces where appearances matter more than actual productivity. You stay late because everyone else stays late. You smile because everyone else smiles. You hide stress because everyone else hides stress. The system teaches people to endure quietly instead of speaking honestly. Then there's the government. For years, Japanese politicians avoided major reforms because real change felt too risky. Instead of rebuilding the economy aggressively after the crash of the 1990s, they tried to preserve the old system at all costs. They printed money, protected failing companies, increased debt, avoided painful restructuring. Why? Because short-term stability became more important than long-term survival. Politicians feared social unrest and economic panic. So instead of fixing deep problems, they covered them up with temporary solutions. The result is a country that looks stable on the surface, while huge structural problems keep growing underneath. And then there's the education system. From childhood, Japanese kids face intense pressure. Good grades, good schools, good universities, good careers. The path is extremely narrow. If you fail important exams or struggle socially, many people feel like their entire future is collapsing. That creates massive anxiety from a young age. Japan built a society where making mistakes feels terrifying. And when failure becomes unbearable, people stop taking risks. That's one reason innovation slowed down too. Many workers became afraid of standing out, challenging authority, or trying something different. Safety became more important than creativity. And over time, the entire culture became emotionally rigid. But maybe the biggest responsibility belongs to social expectations themselves. Japanese society places enormous pressure on harmony and conformity. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't embarrass your family. Don't inconvenience other people. This sounds polite and civilized at first, but over time it creates emotional isolation. People hide depression, hide loneliness, hide stress, hide anger. Everyone keeps performing normality even when they're falling apart inside. That's why Japan's collapse feels so silent. People rarely explode publicly. They withdraw instead. Some lock themselves in rooms for years. Others disappear emotionally while continuing normal routines. Some simply stop dreaming about the future altogether. Then technology made everything worse. The modern digital world gave lonely people an escape route, and Japan embraced it completely. You no longer need real human interaction to survive daily life. You can order food online, work remotely, watch endless entertainment, spend entire days inside virtual worlds. Technology became emotional anesthesia. Instead of fixing loneliness, it made loneliness easier to tolerate. And eventually millions started replacing real relationships with artificial comfort. Anime characters, virtual companions, games, parasocial relationships online. Reality became exhausting. Digital life felt safer, but there's another uncomfortable truth here too. Japan became a victim of its own success. After World War II, the country rebuilt itself with unbelievable discipline and determination. It created one of the safest, cleanest, and most organized societies in history. That success created pride, but it also created rigidity. Japan became extremely good at preserving systems even after those systems stopped working properly. The country resisted immigration for decades because it feared losing social stability. It resisted changing work culture because companies feared losing productivity. It resisted challenging traditions because traditions became tied to national identity itself. But the world changed rapidly. Technology changed, global competition changed, relationships changed, economics changed, and Japan struggled to adapt. The country became trapped between old expectations and modern reality. Young people inherited enormous pressure, but fewer rewards. They were told to work harder than ever while watching salaries stagnate, housing remain expensive, and emotional exhaustion spread everywhere. Eventually, many simply checked out, mentally. And maybe that's the darkest part of all. Japan's collapse wasn't caused by evil people trying to destroy society. Most people were actually trying to protect stability. Companies wanted order, politicians wanted calm, families wanted security. But together they created a system so rigid, demanding, and emotionally exhausting that millions of people slowly stopped wanting to participate in it. That's why Japan matters to the rest of the world, because the same pressures are growing everywhere now. Overwork, isolation, digital addiction, falling birth rates, mental exhaustion, loss of purpose. Japan just reached the future first. And when you look closely at what happened there, you realize something deeply unsettling. Modern societies may not collapse because they become too poor or too violent. They may collapse because people quietly lose the emotional strength to keep living inside them. Now imagine Japan 20 or 30 years from now. Not the version tourists see, not the anime version, not the neon dream people post on Instagram. Imagine the real future that's slowly forming underneath all of that. A country where entire towns no longer exist, where most of the population is elderly, where millions of homes sit abandoned and rotting, where schools disappear because there are no children left to fill classrooms. That future already started, and the terrifying part is how unstoppable it looks. Every year, Japan loses hundreds of thousands of people. It's like watching a major city vanish annually. Fewer babies, more funerals, more empty houses, more silence. And when population collapse reaches a certain point, the entire structure of society starts changing. First, the economy weakens even more. There are fewer workers paying taxes and supporting the system. But at the same time, there are more elderly people needing healthcare, pensions, medicine, and constant support. That pressure keeps growing. The government spends more money. Debt increases further. The central bank prints more money to keep things stable. But eventually, even wealthy countries hit limits, and Japan is getting dangerously close to those limits. At the same time, huge parts of the workforce are disappearing. Japan already struggles to find enough workers for hospitals, factories, delivery services, construction, transportation, and elderly care. Some rural towns barely have any young adults left at all. There are villages where almost everyone is over 65. Think about how strange that is. Entire communities surviving mostly on old people waiting for the next hospital appointment. And this creates a terrifying question. Who keeps the country running when there aren't enough people left to run it? Japan's answer has been technology, robots, automation, artificial intelligence. And yes, Japan is building more of that every year. Robots that help elderly people walk, machines that serve food, automated stores with barely any staff. But there's a huge problem with this solution. Technology can replace labor. It cannot replace human life itself. A robot cannot create a family. It cannot raise children. It cannot rebuild communities. It cannot give society emotional energy. Japan is trying to solve a human collapse using machines, and that future feels incredibly cold. Imagine giant cities full of elderly people being cared for by robots, while younger generations continue shrinking year after year. It doesn't feel like a futuristic paradise. It feels like civilization entering retirement. Then there's another major issue nobody likes discussing openly: immigration. For decades, Japan resisted large-scale immigration because the country wanted to protect social stability and cultural identity. But demographic collapse changes everything. Now Japan desperately needs workers. That's why more immigrants from Vietnam, China, Nepal, the Philippines, and other countries are arriving every year to fill jobs Japanese workers can no longer cover. Factories need them. Convenience stores need them. Hospitals need them. Without foreign workers, huge parts of the economy would already struggle even harder. But this creates tension too, because Japan spent decades building a society based on cultural uniformity and strict social expectations. Rapid demographic decline is now forcing the country to slowly open doors it never truly wanted to open. And even that may not be enough, because the deeper problem isn't just labor shortages, it's emotional collapse. You can already see signs of it everywhere. Young people delaying adulthood, avoiding relationships, avoiding children, avoiding long-term responsibility altogether. Many no longer believe the future will reward sacrifice. That's deadly for any civilization, because modern societies survive on one basic assumption: tomorrow matters. People work hard because they believe life can improve. They build families because they believe the future is worth investing in. Once enough people stop believing that, society slowly loses momentum, and Japan feels dangerously close to that point. There are already regions where the future almost vanished physically. Drive outside Tokyo and you'll find ghost towns, abandoned schools covered in weeds, broken houses collapsing under rain and mold, empty streets where only elderly people remain. Nature slowly starts taking everything back. Forests grow over old roads. Wild animals return to abandoned neighborhoods. Entire villages begin disappearing into silence. Japan now has millions of abandoned homes. Millions. Some are literally given away for free because nobody wants them anymore. In many rural areas, property stopped being an asset and became a burden. Young people don't want to move there because there are no jobs, no nightlife, no opportunities, no future. So the houses rot, slowly, quietly, like the country itself. And maybe the darkest future isn't economic collapse. Maybe it's social emptiness. A society where people still survive physically, but lose deeper human connection entirely. Where birth rates collapse permanently. Where loneliness becomes normal. Where relationships feel optional. Where technology replaces intimacy. Where comfort becomes more important than meaning. That's the future Japan may be entering first. And honestly, parts of the rest of the developed world are already moving in the same direction. Falling birth rates, loneliness epidemics, mental exhaustion, digital addiction, work replacing life itself. Japan simply reached the edge earlier than everyone else. That's why the country feels less like science fiction and more like a warning sign. A preview. The first developed society trying to survive after losing long-term belief in its own future. And maybe the scariest part is this: Japan probably won't collapse dramatically. No giant revolution, no sudden explosion, no cinematic apocalypse. The country will most likely continue fading slowly, The trains will still run on time, the stores will still look clean, the vending machines will still glow late at night. But year after year, there will simply be fewer people, fewer children, fewer families, fewer dreams. Until one day, the world realizes something terrifying. A civilization can stay organized, advanced, peaceful, and technologically impressive, while quietly losing the will to continue itself. Japan is not dying in the way people expected. There are no invading armies, no giant explosions, no cities burning on live television. Everything still looks clean. Everything still works. The trains still arrive exactly on time. And that's exactly why it feels so disturbing. Because Japan forces us to face a terrifying idea. A civilization can slowly disappear while still looking completely functional from the outside. That's the real horror story here. For years, people imagined the apocalypse as something loud. Chaos, riots, hunger, violence in the streets. But Japan shows a different kind of ending. A quiet one. An ending where people slowly stop believing in the future. They stop having children. They stop building families. They stop trusting relationships. They stop dreaming about tomorrow. And eventually, society starts emptying itself from the inside. That's what's happening in Japan right now. Millions of people living alone. Workers completely burned out before middle age. Entire towns disappearing. Schools shutting down. Apartments filled with people who died unnoticed. The country still moves, but emotionally, something already broke. Japan now feels like a giant machine, continuing to operate long after the people inside it lost their energy. And maybe the saddest part is how polite the collapse feels. Nobody screams. People simply keep following routines. Go to work, bow politely, ride the train home, sleep a few hours, repeat again tomorrow. Even when life itself starts feeling empty. That's why Japan's crisis is bigger than economics. It's existential. The country became a place where comfort and survival slowly replaced meaning. For many people, life turned into maintenance mode. Work enough to survive. Consume enough entertainment to stay distracted. Avoid emotional pain. Expect less from the future. And little by little, that mindset spreads through society like fog. Because civilizations don't only collapse from war or disaster. Sometimes they collapse from exhaustion, from loneliness, from emotional burnout, from losing the belief that tomorrow is worth building. That's why Japan matters so much to the rest of the world. It doesn't feel like some strange, isolated country anymore. It feels like a warning. Many developed nations are already showing the same symptoms. Falling birth rates, extreme isolation, digital addiction, overwork, mental exhaustion, people replacing real relationships with screens and algorithms. The modern world keeps making life more convenient while quietly making people feel more disconnected. And maybe that's the real crisis of the 21st century. Not technology itself, but what happens when technology gives people a comfortable way to emotionally disappear from reality. Japan became the first large modern country where this problem fully revealed itself. That's why Tokyo feels so strange at night. The city still glows beautifully. Neon signs flash everywhere. The streets stay organized. The vending machines shine in perfect rows. But underneath all that beauty, there's a heavy feeling. A feeling that the future already started running out of energy. Like the entire country is surviving on momentum from another era. And the silence keeps growing. You hear it in empty playgrounds, in abandoned schools, in apartments where someone died alone months ago, in train cars full of exhausted people staring silently at phones. Japan became the first modern country where the future itself started physically disappearing. And the most unsettling part is this. The collapse looks elegant. No dramatic revolution, no giant collapse overnight. just a slow fading process. A society bowing politely while it quietly shrinks year after year. Maybe decades from now, Tokyo will still have giant skyscrapers and advanced robots. Maybe the trains will still run perfectly. But if there are no children, no strong families, no emotional connection between people, then all of that becomes decoration. A beautiful shell. A museum still running automatically after the visitors already left. And that may be the final lesson Japan gives the world. Technology cannot save a society that no longer believes deeply in life itself. Because civilizations are not kept alive by machines. They survive because people still believe tomorrow matters. And in Japan, for millions of people, that belief has already started to disappear.